Thank you, everyone, for being here. It's so beautiful to see so many friends and former colleagues and students who came from all over the place and amazing musicians. Thank you to all the other readers. And Ron, thank you so much, and Michael for putting this together. I'm going to start with a poem by Ross Gay. A small, needful fact. A small, needful fact is that Eric Gardner worked for some time for the Parks and Rec Horticultural Department, which means perhaps that with his very large hands, perhaps in all likelihood, he gently put into the earth some plants which, most likely, some of them, in all likelihood, continue to do what plants do, continue to house and feed small and necessary creatures, like be pleasant to touch and smell, like convert sunlight into food, like make it easier for us to breathe. And I'm gonna read the first the three poems that are coming out in Alaska Quarterly Review. Thank you so much, Ron. And a couple of them take their title from the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows by Koenig. And so this one is called Rask. And Rask comes from rue, to regret, and burrask, a tempest. In a cave on a farmer's ancestral grounds, we scrambled toward its darkest pit, souls slipping on wet rocks, hands fumbling for walls coated thick in, we later learned, guano. And when we flooded the ceiling with light, we gasped. Clustered by the dozen to share body heat, they hung like chandeliers. We prodded with flashlight beams, swirled our wrists to mimic their swooping. Bodies began to fall, one, then another, too small for a thud, naked and milky and still blind. And we watched, not knowing that when roused from torpor, they lose energy worth weeks of sustenance, or how to stop it. And another poem about bats, and this is set in the Cosmic Cave in Arkansas, just outside Eureka Springs. Cosmic. I was less taken with a cave lake being bottomless than with the stalactites becoming stalagmites in its mirror, and all of us bent over the rail, staring at our death masks. Maybe I'd descended into one cave too many. It's not that I don't tremble or have had enough of the holy, but splendor and reverence have come to quicken my pulse with shame. Then there was the slit, traveling the cavernous roof for miles, hedged with straw stalactites that grow 1 inch per 100 years. Their sexticennial presence, proof we were safe. She won't jilt us, joked the guide. Young and beautiful Rachel, like you, I was seething at how prisoners forced to build the cement platform on which we stood were mentioned, how prisoners forced to build the cement platform on which we stood were mentioned as a fun fact. Were the 30 still on death row among them? Have those freed brought their kids to the cosmic cave to see the platform and from it heard as we did how rainbow trout were released into this lake home to blind fish, how the latter were killed not knowing by whom or why, how it did not work out well for the new occupants either. Without flow, trapped in stasis, their eggs rotted. On promising myself to buy only previously owned clothes. And this makes a reference to the story of the Wongs, a Chinese-American family who lived at 103 Orchard Street in the 1970s. And I learned about their story from the Tenement Museum, and what else? Mrs. Wong worked for a very long time in the garment factories. Give me precision, if only for the most finite of tasks, the shallowest of missions, to wear each thrift store, each flea market garment like second skin, until I hear the breath above each stitch, what accelerated the heart at the spindle, what clouded the lung, what caught in the whirring machine, who sang? Did your fingers too callous with needlework until they lost their whirls like Mrs. Wong's? When time came to naturalize, her fingers had no prints to prove who she was. Silver cotton, hemp, tencel, flax, petroleum, army of polymers. Feed my greed, the ghost of each thread, soft and arsenic. Thank you. And two new poems too, and they're both called Deep Cut from the musical term, that song that kind of falls under the radar on a good album, on some album. So I grew up in Romania and I moved to the United States when I was 24. This poem is set in Romania in 1984. Deep Cut 1. He collected wings, which meant most were yet to be severed from the body, and I watched him razor off the onion thins of red admirals and lime-speck pugs, 9-spotted moth and raspberry clearwings, the June bug's shellac. The damselflies, already dead, required a breath-holding kind of delicacy. One time, I gifted him the fins of river trout. He held them briefly, stumped, then flung them far away. Within a year, he acquired precision, went bigger, sparrows and swifts disabled by cats or windows. In the narrow alley between our communist flats, my eyes scissored and sawed along, made intimate the music of his wrist. He acknowledged my apprenticeship only once, when I brought a barn bat, freshly dead. He touched its nose, then smiled at me, and that was the last I saw of him. Maybe he sensed I'd claimed the wingless body back for burial. We were both 12, born seconds apart. Our laboring mothers hardened each other across hospital beds, and our mouth traded breasts to harvest the last sip of colostrum. I've been afraid to look into his whereabouts, but imagine in time he came to dismember without delight, operate without a margin of error, gather enough wings for his flight. Thank you. Deep Cut, Romania, 2022. And as you might know, the racism and the anti-sentiment and discrimination against Roma, popularly known and Gypsies, is still very much on the rise, unfortunately, in Eastern Europe and especially Romania. When you return a year later, the hillside is denuded. The last of its timber, stacked by the roadside, will become by winter a politician's second summer home, this one raised for the mistress who threatens blackmail. For now, it waits for the passerby, preferably Roma, who'll subtract a log or two to keep his family warm. The village cop is on the lookout. He doesn't want a second home. He wants to send his son to school in Germany. He wants stamps on papers. He wants hard cash. The man who won't get to burn the log in his fireplace will be made to feel lucky he got away with just a fine, a misdemeanor, his face splayed in the local paper. So the town rests assured the perpetrator has been punished. It believes what it wants, that the man with the hand axe logged away the forest, left the hillside barren, forced the wolves into town. He is, therefore, also responsible for the bear trampling through the supermarket. And isn't it ironic, the reporter adds, given the historical evidence, the man being of the kind who once trained the beast to dance? The timber's on its way now, and logic is irrelevant. Your anger, too, irrelevant. You abandoned. You've been writing poems. You are breathing a different air. You don't get to choose what you return here for. And that'll end with my return to Romania when I die. And some of you know I'm a chocoholic and I make my own chocolate. And this poem is called Everless, Ever plus Nevertheless, also from the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows. I will die one day in this land, and you will fly back a single bar of me, packed in dry ice. The airport dogs will sniff the carousel for traces of live matter, and the cacao nutty smell will send them whimpering. Make sure I'm conched right, neither too gritty nor too emulsified, tempered properly so I'm not laced in sugar bloom. The departed will attend to the rest. For 7 years, on days of the dead, birthdays, anniversaries, drive your family to any cemetery gate to hand out dark assortments the children begged the night before. Keep the tradition even if no one is ever waiting. If I'm lucky, they will say, Grandma overdosed on nibs. Say she got what she wanted, death by chocolate. They'll make myth of this. Thank you.